I'm Terry Boone, a member of the steering committee for Town Eating Day in Norwich, Vermont, and this is our third year as Town Eating Day, coming up on Saturday, February 28th at the Marion Cross School in Norwich from 9:30 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. And other members of the steering committee are here with me for the program. And if you don't know anything about Town Eating Day, we hope by the time this program's finished you'll know a little more about it, but we really hope to see you there in person. To my left, I'm going to introduce other members of the committee first, and then I'm going to ask a couple of questions. To my far left is Lisa Cotto, who has been with us now for a couple of years and is an important part of the eating and the food component of that. We'll talk about that in a minute. Henry Shire, to her right, and Rob Gerwit, two of the original provocateurs or members of getting this whole thing organized back when we first called it Get Off Our Duffs Day 4 years ago, or was that 3 years ago?
That was 3 years ago.
That was 3 years ago. So this is our second year as Town Eating Day. Lisa, as somebody who's done an outstanding job with lots of volunteers of pulling the food part together, why did you do that? Why did you? How did we convince you to take that on, and what has been your experience so far?
Well, I love food, and it makes me happy to be involved in anything that has to do with food, from the making to the organizing. And also, I was honored to be involved with this group, which is doing such an important thing for the town, bringing everyone together to talk about the issues that we're dealing with as a town. And it's really also wonderful to work with local chefs in our town.
What do you remember from last year of the various soups and stews and baked goods and food that was there? And we had a turnout, my memory is, of about 45 or 50 people for the morning session, then it sort of peaked for lunch. What do you remember about the selection of the foods? And
are you sure you want to get me started on this?
Yeah, but you're a food person. Let's, please.
I remember that people were saying that after they had lunch, that it was some of the best soup they'd ever had, and I'm not making that up. There was quite the enthusiasm. Do you all remember that? Mm-hmm. We had, I think, 14 soups, all homemade from different kitchens around town. And they were outstanding. We had a winter squash with kale and curry. We had a beef stew with dates that was all the rage. We had a cinnamon chili, a kielbasa soup. I mean, unbelievable. And we even had a little left over. So that shows you that, don't worry, we won't run out of food if you come. Mm-hmm. And then we had some local bread from Alachant, which is some of the best bread around, and some, of course, cheddar cheese, and home-baked pies for dessert.
What I remember, aside from sampling most of the food that was there during our lunch break, is that my interaction with you, with the rest of the committees, you've been at the meetings and we talked about things, worked on logistics and what kind of food, but then the day of the event, all the help that you had there in the kitchen, both getting the prep in the morning and the time when we're trying to, who are those people? How did you round up the volunteers?
People actually came out of the woodwork and offered. I didn't almost even have to ask people. They just said, do you need me there? And mm-hmm. I had Lisa Christie, I had Julia Dickinson, and who else? There was one other person, Julia Dickinson, Lisa Christie, and Katie Kitchell. She was there. And it was just this great team. Everything was set up by the time we had lunch. There were no problems. It was all hot. Mm-hmm. And we had a great time doing it. So, and that's the thing about events like this, is it's always fun to be near the food for me, because it's a convivial atmosphere mm-hmm. and sharing atmosphere. So yes, it was supported by all the makers and all the helpers. Well,
it's obviously has become part of the focus of the whole day, and it's also obviously at lunchtime after we've ended our morning session. So I'm going to come back to you in a few minutes and ask some more questions about that before we end the program.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Henry Shire and Rob Gerwit, two of the original members of the committee that started working on this 4 years ago, and we talked about it. This is sort of a repeat, but let's assume that people watching this evening have not seen this last year's broadcast. We talked about this idea for a year or so before we got it off the ground, and I remember wrestling with or discussing the idea of the name, and as I alluded to a minute ago, that first year it was Get Off Our Duffs Day, trying to get more volunteers involved, and then we changed the name last year to Town Eating Day. Henry, what's your memory of why are we doing this?
Well, my memory is, Terry, that you and I were standing in front of Tracy Hall several years back, holding candidate signs for our favorite candidates and freezing. And we exhausted subjects like baseball and
right.
theater, and I told you that we had been the evening before at our discussion session of town meeting, and I had told you how I had noted in recent years a gradual dwindling of participation, diminished amount of discussion, and that I thought we were losing the flavor of something that initially had been very important to me 30-odd years ago when I first came to Norwich as a traditional town meeting at that point. So I told you also, I think, that I had this idea of trying to do something else. And you were sympathetic, which was good. And
it's a marginal above empathetic, right? Stephanie?
well, it was cold day.
Right.
And so we grew it from there.
Right. And Rob, while I'd seen Rob at various activities in town prior to that, didn't really meet Rob until we had that first evening meeting talking about this. And I know that you and Henry had discussions. So is he accurate in his memory of that? How did you get roped into this?
Sure. Well, it was interesting because at around maybe a little bit after he'd had that conversation with you, I'd also been talking with various people about the question of this fall off in participation, and more sort of the way informational town meeting, that is the evening before the actual voting, takes place. While several hundred people show up, which is a great thing, it's very much focused on the particular warrant items that we'll be voting on the next day, which on the one hand is appropriate, but on the other hand means that there isn't much space for at least what I imagine a more old-fashioned town meeting did, which was not only to talk about the particular warrant items, but to be able to sort of broaden the conversation, to talk more generally about the town and where it's going and how it's run, and in essence to make the democratic part of town meeting democracy really active and vibrant and energetic. And so in conversations with Henry and others, the way this all began was really with a focus on how do you revitalize town meeting. But as we talked, we began to realize that if we're really talking about town governance, that in fact there's more than just the town meeting and the select board and people who directly day to day run the town. There's also this whole grouping of volunteer committees and commissions that week by week and month by month are responsible for huge portions of what actually makes a town live and grow. And that if we didn't address those and didn't find a way of bringing them into some sort of conversation with townspeople, that we would be missing a significant part of what makes towns work. And I think that is where the concept that we now think of as town eating really started to take hold.
CATV, it just occurred to me listening to you describe that in part because of CATV, obviously the select board is the most visible board or organization, governmental organization in town, but is it fair to say that it really only represents 5% of the volunteer activity? When you think about all the other boards and committees and subcommittees that don't get their meetings broadcast, and we rarely do they get anything about them in the newspapers, there's a lot of a lot of time going into different boards and committees.
Absolutely. I would actually throw that over to, I would introduce Watt and then throw
Thank
it
you.
over
Right.
to
Watt Alexander, who's the other member of the original steering committee, has taken Lisa's chair there. Thank you, Watt, for sitting in. And you've heard this and you've been around for the meetings. And has anybody gone astray yet in my questions here of asking why we started this and why we're doing this?
No, I think that the question of, I think it brings together how there were several threads that we're trying to weave together in Town Eating Day. One being the community getting together in a way that a lot of town meetings in other towns, and historically town meeting has had that social function. And that's certainly the eating part. The lunch part. We have the piece regarding volunteer participation, really trying to find a way for small town government to interact with the townspeople and to bring a more direct contact between townspeople and committees together. And that's really what the morning session is focused on, with 6 breakout sessions focused on 6 individual committees or commissions of town. hoping to use that opportunity to get away from their typical week-to-week or month-to-month agenda and talk to people about what they do, what it would involve to volunteer for those committees, and give a chance once a year for those committees to interact with people in a less structured way. There's also in the morning component a piece that really is almost like a town committee jobs fair, where we're really talking to these committees in terms of how much time they spend on their meetings, when they meet, what kind of a time commitment it means over a month and a year, to help people who might be interested in participating hear some of those basic issues, questions answered for them. What is the responsibility of this commission or this committee? Does the commission or committee really get to do the things that that they would appear to from the outside, or are they more tied up in an agenda and a set of agenda items that have already been predefined? And then in the afternoon after lunch, we address the school board, and then what we call a plenary session, which is an opportunity to speak about larger issues in town, larger political issues in town, which never really have a forum except at Dan and Witt's or picking up kids at school or around the dinner table at a dinner party or something. Really talking about the broad questions that town government addresses one way or the other, whether it does it because of a broad consensus or broad discussion, or does it because of a few people who are appointed or elected to positions acting on it.
You know as well as I do, some of the people watching this broadcast have not been to Town Eating Day, don't know anything about it, and some watching perhaps have in fact been there. But let's, if we can, let's get specific for a minute. I have the crib sheet, and I know you've got it in your head, but let's talk about the three of you, about the different boards and committees that are going to be there this year, what their topics are going to be, and you've got a comment I want to ask about in a minute about the equal footing as far as people in the audience versus the board. So whoever would like to start with the morning sessions, jump right in.
Okay, we gather, as you said earlier, at 9:30, and that's to give people some time to get there, have a scone or
Right.
coffee, tea.
And that's in the gymnasium at Marion Cross
And that's
School.
at the Marion Cross School gym. And then at 10 o'clock, we break up into 3 sessions, separate places, one in the gym, one in the library, one in the multipurpose room at the school. And those sessions go for about 50 minutes. Then there's a break.
50, yeah.
Yeah, 50 minutes. And then another session of similar length for 3 other groups in the same 3 places. So I'll talk about, if you don't mind, the 2 that I'm going to sort of
Great.
facilitate. We take roles in trying to organize or keep those discussions going. At 10 o'clock that day, I'll be talking with the affordable housing group and whoever wishes to join us. And we're going to say, we're going to cover a topic which we've called, Who Are We Kidding? Affordable housing has been on the agenda of the town for an awful
years,
lot of
right,
time.
right.
And we need to know what they're doing, what their thoughts are, and they hopefully will want some new ideas from people who are interested in participating in that discussion. And then in the second of the sessions that I'll be involved with, it'll be with the Conservation Commission, and we're talking about there seeing the forest for the trees. I don't know what that means, but that's because sometimes I see the forest and not the trees.
Well, I can actually explain a little bit
Yeah,
how
good.
we came up with that, which was the Conservation Commission has a range of things that they could be working on, from conservation programs to more generally looking at sort of the specifics of wildlife and of the natural world within Norwich. And so the question we're asking of them is, how do they decide why they're focusing on this and not that?
Okay.
So,
That's a good answer. And now you can talk about
Talk
a
about the
couple of
groups you're
sessions
going
you're
to
going to be involved in.
facilitate.
well, I'm going to be facilitating 2 groups, the Town Finance Committee and the Listers. And partly I'm doing that this year because while I've been fairly familiar over the years with conservation, with the various organizations or committees that deal with land use, I have not been very familiar with finance and listers, and so this is really a chance for me to get to know them better. The Finance Committee will be the first up from 10 to 10:50, and the question we're asking My apologies, the listers will be up. The question we're asking is who gets taxed? There's been controversy within Norwich over various moves by the listers to raise property taxes on one set of houses versus another. A few months ago, it was the houses up along Bragg Hill. Taxes, of course, hit everybody in town. And so I think this is a chance for people really to come talk to the listers about how it is they do their work, what it is that goes into it, and really to pull the curtain back on what can sometimes be an opaque process. Not deliberately on the part of the listers, just a lot of people don't know about it. And so it's really an opportunity to talk about those issues. And then there's the broader question that we'll take up at the session after that with the Finance Committee. We're titling that "The Taxman Cometh," with a question mark at the end. There are so many different things that go into to determining what the tax burden is on individual households within the town, that it's really a chance to talk to people whose job it is to look ahead and to look at the state of the economy and a whole variety of things that affect how the town will be taxed, and then more broadly, how the town will be run fiscally. All these things, of course, determine the budget. So it's, again, a chance for a fairly wide-ranging discussion with a group of people who delve in great detail into both the budget and the various state, local, federal, and other laws and conditions that affect our taxes.
And I think,
Let me take this
well,
over here.
I have a specific question for
okay.
him. We'll come to him in a second. And so, yes, Henry talked about the two boards that he will help facilitate the discussion. Rob just talked about his. Two other in the morning sessions, the breakout sessions at 10 o'clock. The Transportation Committee will be there, and the first breakout session at 10. And they'll be meeting in the library, and with anybody in the audience that morning that chooses to go to that session. And we're calling that Norwich Chokes on Cars, ? Transportation at 10 o'clock. At 11 o'clock, the Planning Commission will be there with, and we've suggested these topics to each of these boards or committees, and the topic we suggested to the Planning Committee was any questions. And somebody, when we attended one of their meetings back in December, they thought that was maybe a little too narrow. But deliberately trying to provoke audience participation, which I will now give to Watt, because I want to ask him the question that has come up a couple of times in our planning meetings this year of about trying to get members of the community who don't normally show up for these meetings, not our meeting, but committee meetings or board meetings, put them on an equal footing with the actual committee members. Could you speak to that and what your idea is there?
I think our hope is that if you've attended any of these committees' meetings, the regular meetings, often there's a section, a small period of time set out for public comment, and the rest of the meeting is generally predetermined agenda, and very seldom is that agenda a broad question of, well, here we are as a planning commission, what should we be doing? Or here we are as a finance committee, what sorts of things are townspeople concerned about? Most of these committees have more work than they can really handle. All of them are volunteer committees. Listers are an exception to that, but all the rest of these are volunteer committees who have lives that probably have more things than they can get done anyway, and then they're volunteering on these boards, and these boards often have very ambitious multi-year agendas which are consistently and continuously extended. If you go to these meetings, you find there's very little room for the broad sort of conversation about what that committee or what the town ought to be doing and what that committee's role might be in altering the town's direction or asking questions of the town. We hope that this is an opportunity for the committees to receive input from townspeople about what they could be doing, what issues are out there percolating. We also are really hoping to help influence these committees a little bit more to take a different view of public participation in their meetings. There have been some rocky political years in Norwich, and particularly I think the Planning Commission's been really a political football for a number of years. And I think in the process, there have been a number of people who have participated in these committees' business in a way that frankly wasn't very constructive. And I think naturally these committees and commissions have found themselves closing in a little bit.
You get gun shy.
Well, and just really to try to
Right.
contain the task when you're being questioned about everything you're doing one given Tuesday and then don't hear anything for another 6 months. It's hard to take seriously that kind of input.
Right.
And the idea is to try to help create a continuous dialogue where these committees will begin to look at Town Eating Day as an opportunity each year to really check in with voters. And as they start to see constructive participation from voters, they might begin to open up their agendas and open up their meetings in a way to try to reach out to those people as they see more of those new faces in their meetings. The flip side is that we're trying to create a context for a discussion with a committee that does not involve handouts and PowerPoint presentations and things,
Right.
so that if you're going to go and talk to the Planning Commission about what they might be doing, you aren't going to find yourself overwhelmed by questions of state regulations and changing sewer regulations or funding questions that you wouldn't have an opportunity to really get up to speed on. We looked for issues and questions that would allow the audience and the committee members to be on an equal footing to speak about really the things that matter in the more general ways and leave the details to the committees and the commissions to pick up on. Again, it's an idea of this is really, we are all faced with the challenge of how small town government and small town democracy ought to work. And I think anyone who's lived in Norwich for a while has some questions about whether it is working in Norwich. This is an attempt to help create a hands-on experience and a constructive interaction between volunteers who are putting in a lot of time to try to do the town's business and the people who expect the town's business to be done in a way that engages the constructive side of all of those people, avoids the confrontational, accusatory kind of language that we've seen over the last 10 years, and gives everybody an opportunity to think of new ways of working together in a way that does not view people's agendas as burdens, but sees them as opportunities to see things in a different way.
Before we end this broadcast, we'll repeat the time slots on the different committees and boards that are going to be on. But one more question I would ask of you, Watt. It's not unique to Norwich that the school budget is a big chunk of the tax bill, and for 3 years running now, our after lunch session, the lead-off session after lunch, we have invited, and they've participated, the Norwich School Board. So they again are going to be our lead-off discussion right after lunch.
That's right. At 1 o'clock following lunch runs from noon until really about 1 o'clock. At 1 o'clock, we'll be sitting down with the Norwich School Board, and this, instead of a breakout session, this will be really everyone who's been there during the day has an opportunity to talk to the school board. And the question we've given them is, where's the public? And this again has a few different ways it can be taken. One aspect of that is the budget process, where the decisions about how much money is really going to be spent in the school board's cycle of meetings is always a difficult setting for members of the public to really engage in. A lot of that budget is set by things that don't really have to do with any single year's events or single year's decisions on policy and things. These are ongoing responsibilities of the school board and of the schools. And we're asking how much public participation is realistic in that setting. Another way of possibly taking this question would be, these are public schools, but they obviously aren't public schools for everyone. There are private school alternatives out there. What is the public that we're thinking we're serving, and what are the values of that public that we're trying to serve with a school? There are a few other ways to take that. Those are just two completely different ways of taking the same question. Again, the same idea here is we're not looking for PowerPoint presentations, and we aren't looking for a breakdown of the CLA and an explanation of Act
But an
60.
informal give and take with the audience.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so that goes for about an hour, from 1 until 1:45 or 2, and then we have a plenary session that wraps up at the end of that.
And the plenary session traditionally has been an opportunity to speak about issue of broad interest and concern to the town. Often it has been a question that's focused on specifically aspects of what it takes to run a town government and run a town government in a positive and constructive way. We actually don't have a specific topic that we've announced yet for this plenary session this year.
But it'll be on our website by the time this program is broadcast.
Right. Last year's topic was who's in charge?
Right.
And the question at that point raised a number of interesting offshoots, and that's the idea of these conversations. Is it's not a presentation; it's an opportunity for dialogue. And the dialogue last year really focused more on efforts to communicate better, so people maybe understood who was in charge, or so Basically, another way of maybe looking at that conversation was the people are in charge, but maybe the people aren't communicating effectively enough with the people who are making the decisions, and therefore there's been a breakdown in that communication, and in that case, that vacuum is filled by people who are doing their best, but maybe are doing their best in a way that they might find blows up in their face when a number of people in town feel that they haven't been consulted. So this year's topic will be another similarly broad question. We just haven't settled on that yet.
Yeah. Obviously, we are recording this program prior to Town Eating Day, but we do have a website, towneating.org. So by the time you're watching this on CATV8, you'll be able to go to our website and see a full list of the breakouts that we talked about. But I'm going to ask Henry and Rob to jump back in. We have about 4 or 5 minutes left in the program, and I'm going to ask Lisa to come back on in a minute to talk about the food one more time. If somebody saw you on this program and then saw you on the street, oh yeah, I saw you on TV the other day, what would you say to them in 30 seconds to recruit them, to encourage them to come to this event? What's your missionary statement to them?
Mine would be that that small town government doesn't work without the people who live in that small town. That you know, when we talk about volunteers being on these boards and commissions, these are just your fellow townspeople who have decided that there are various aspects of town life that they're interested in and that they want to try to make better. To that degree, a small town democracy really depends on everybody in the town being involved in one way or another. This is our way of making it possible for people to talk about town affairs and to learn about them, and sometimes to learn details they didn't know about, or to get things off their chest that they were interested in talking about in a very informal and positive way, without recrimination, without shouting, but really in an atmosphere that in which everybody's on an equal footing, and in which we treat one another you know, as fellows who are all just trying to do our best to make the town we live in a better place.
Henry, would your comment to somebody on the street be any different from
I just
Rob?
want to tag this with, by saying, excuse me, we're doing this on the 22nd of January, 2 days after we listen to our new president essentially say to people, get involved. And I think this is a way for people, especially newcomers to our town, but anybody, really, to learn about what's going on, what maybe they might be interested in helping us do. And I think that's really the root of what we're trying to convey.
Yeah, I think when you think about all the towns around the Upper Valley, depending on how you define the boundaries of the Upper Valley, but at a minimum 25, 28, 30 towns, different sizes, different amounts of energy in their volunteer base, whether it's a church or a civic club. Again, we're not unique. All towns have to struggle with this, and the volunteer participation seems to ebb and flow at different times, and some people put in an incredible amount of hours and time with their organization, and others show up occasionally. So we would certainly hope that you would put it on your calendar for Saturday, February 28th. I'll come back in a minute and talk very quickly about the breakout sessions. Lisa, thank you for coming back to talk to us. And in case somebody missed the first few minutes, let's talk about the food a little more. What are you looking for as far as people in Norwich that might want to be involved or help you with your other volunteers pull together the food aspects
Well,
of this?
thank you for asking that question. If anybody out there has a favorite soup recipe or just loves cooking or wants to contribute to this event, we are happily accepting pots of soup. You can contact me, and I don't know how we go about listing.
Email, phone number, whatever you care to give is fine. Or maybe go to our website, whatever is the simplest.
I go to our website, which is
towneating.org.
And also, I want to say to everybody that there really is such thing as a free lunch, because this lunch doesn't cost anything and it is absolutely delicious. And when you asked earlier about what the memories were of last year, I want to say that what came to me really overall is the picture of people sitting down together with their neighbors, having lunch, sharing ideas, and feeding each other, basically. Feeding each other ideas, feeding each other their food. It was really energizing to see that. And I think that it makes it a lot easier to talk about some of these tough issues like affordable housing, tax increases, town government, if you know a hot bowl of soup is waiting, and,
Right.
Or a good ginger scone or something, and that will be there. So So I just think it's a special day, and that we hope to see a lot of people there with
All right.
good appetites.
Let me, regardless of the weather, and we don't, who knows what the weather will be on February 28th, but we still have the event. It's Saturday, February 28th. I will quickly go through the opening is at 9:30 until 9:55 in the Marion Cross School Gymnasium. The first 3 sessions are the Board of Listers, who gets taxed, the Affordable Housing Committee, who are we kidding, the Norwich Transportation Committee, Norwich Chokes on Cars. And then at 11 o'clock, we'll have 3 more breakout sessions. The Finance Committee, the Taxman Cometh, the Conservation Committee, seeing the forest for the trees, and then the Planning Commission, any questions. Then the lunch, the Town Eating Day lunch, and then the Norwich School Board at 1 o'clock for about 45 minutes in a very open give and take with the public. Where's the public is the topic that will be addressed there. And then as Watt said, our plenary session starts at 1:45, and we have you out of there by 2:30. We end up with what we call lightning cleanup. Volunteers help put away chairs and tables and so on. So Saturday, February 28th, 9:30 to 3 at Marion Cross School. Thank you to Lisa Cotto, Henry Shire, Rob Gerwitt, and Watt Alexander. And come see us on Town Eating Day, February 28th.
Thanks, Terry.